and we have some special guests on the show today. We're doing a little 96.1 The Wit features. It is a show where we feature guests from around campus and people who we feel that are unique and valuable to the campus community. So for today, we have Chris Morrissey and Sarah Woods. If we could add an applause, we would, but we can't. So air applause, right? So Chris Morrissey, Sarah Woods. Chris, we wanted to have you on the show today because we wanted to kind of talk to you about your perspective on sustainability and kind of the environmental impact that we have, and maybe how you approach thinking about sustainability and kind of maybe the habits that you participate in to practice sustainability. So first, let's do a little introduction. Please, where are you? What's your role here at Bluffton? Maybe where'd you come from, and how long have you been here, and kind of what's the vibe here at Bluffton?
Hey, Zach. Thanks for having me on, and Sarah as well. And I'm an assistant professor of sociology, so I'm in the social sciences department. This is my third year here, so I'm still relatively new. I've grown up a little bit all over the place, but the short version, I went to high school and started college in Michigan. So, go blue. Sorry, and but I went to graduate school at Notre Dame, and then moved here most immediately from Portland, Oregon.
Portland, Oregon. So that's where, and you were doing. Were you teaching or you were doing school in Oregon?
Yeah, I taught at a small school a little bit out of the city called George Fox University.
Okay.
And then was teaching there for 3 years, and then lost that position it was in a temporary position, and so then taught sort of part time at Portland State, at Mount Hood Community College, and drove Uber and substitute taught in the K-12 system.
So is that like, I guess, is that like the American dream now? The doing the Uber? I feel like I hear a lot of people do like that's their way to kind of like survive, like DoorDash and Uber. I feel like that's the thing to do.
I didn't mind it at times, but I think that if that's the American dream, we're all in a bit of trouble.
Yeah, very much so, 100%. So you came to Bluffton. Was that just out of like they offered you a position, or was it like a religious background that you decided to come to Bluffton? What was that transition like?
Oh, yeah, sure. Well, first of all, it was just, they listed a position in academia. Basically the job market is nationwide. It's a national job market. So the postings for that go out. And we have a fair amount of local folks, but we also sort of, everything is, with the web automatically posted. So I applied and went through that process, of course. And I think that the reason I got offered the job is I think that, although I'm not a Mennonite, I think that the fit was really good. I sort of as an adult converted to a Peace Church tradition as a Quaker, and my research sort of is in alignment with that. And so I think I don't really know exactly what the thinking of the search committee was, but I think that's the reason in my mind anyway.
Definitely. And Bluffton very much has that. You said you transitioned from, what was your denomination before Quaker?
Oh yeah, I was raised Roman Catholic.
Okay, Roman Catholic.
Yeah.
And so that was based out of the Peace tradition? Like that transition was because of the Peace tradition that Quakers had?
That made a lot of sense. I mean, there certainly is a thread within Catholicism that sort of emphasizes peace, but I had not been raised much with much of an emphasis on that. For me, it came out of sort of short version, sort of a religious conversion experience in my mid to late 20s, and then sort of just really liking Quaker style worship, which is really sort of just nothing. You just sit there in quiet, and I actually really like that.
That's cool.
So that's where that really sort of was the central driver for that.
Very much interesting. I know when I came here to Bluffton, I come from like a evangelical background, Southern Baptist church, definitely more contemporary. So like it's not like the Southern Baptist you'd see in like the movies Southern Baptist, but way more contemporary, especially style of worship. And I remember coming here, even to the Southern Baptist Church I came to in Bluffton Baptist at the time. It was very much hymns and and singing hymns, and I was like, no way this can be considered worship. Like I thought worship, you were supposed to have this kind of like emotional high, the drums and the electric guitar. But as I began to like understand what worship really was, it made sense to me that like, okay, like I can enjoy this if my heart is really into the worship. And I think over and over when you continuously listen to music, you tend to start liking it too.
Yeah.
So I began to enjoy hymns, and I would almost kind of prefer hymns now and that very much traditional style of worship than a louder, lights and cameras and style of worship.
Yeah, it's an interesting question. I mean, I think that, like, on the one hand, what resonates with you, plus it seems like people should be open, even as you have your preference or whatever, and hopefully sort of we grow in that department, but just also that there's a variety of ways to do this. And so that's kind of interesting to think about. And if you're like in a pastoral role, sort of like how do you sort of manage that within a congregation that may have its preferences or whatever. Kind of interesting stuff.
Definitely. So, and obviously I know just from I'm in one of your classes, so I do know your kind of religious background does impact how you think of sustainability, right? And so that's kind of why we're here today to talk about sustainability. And as I growing up and even coming to college, I started hearing, sustainability, be sustainable. What's our environmental impact like? And I began to wonder, like, what does sustainability actually mean? Like, what's the definition? You know what I mean? And so I don't know that I could sometimes even put like a clear, point a finger to a couple of words and say, this is what it means. But I was constantly in my classes and, in BAS or in capstone, it's like, be sustainable, be sustainable. So my question to you is like, what does it mean to be sustainable? Like, what does sustainability mean?
Sure. Oh, turnabout is fair play, Zach. Well played. I'm always asking people for definitions. And I'm going to have to improvise because I think I have some ideas. I don't know that I have one ready to go to. For me, okay, so as a sociologist, it's not the only way I think, but it's one of the ways I think for sure, and I spend a lot of time doing it. Sociology talks about the ways that we sort of order our lives and we socially construct them, and the principal theme is like alienation, right? That we're feeling estranged from some part of like what we might think of like our truer nature or our true calling in more Christian terms or whatever. And for me, sustainability hooks into that idea in that I think the world that we've built and that we live in, that all of us really are born into, is one in which we're sort of alienated from natural processes, and there's consequences for that. On the one hand, I think that many of us, myself included, don't have a real keen sense. We did not grow up in the land and connected to the land in ways in which most of our forebears did. So we don't understand that world as well, right? And we are born into this world in which we've solved problems in ways that are going to have a lot of sort of usually unintended consequences that are really problematic. So being sustainable for me is like, first of all, kind of dealing with that estrangement from nature. Like, we don't know how the natural world works. The natural world's not perfect. There's natural disasters and stuff. It's not like it's just here to always serve us. But sustainability is sort of bridging that gap between nature and us, and hopefully trying to work towards a world in which we can avoid so many of the sort of negative consequences of the world we built detached from nature, if that makes sense.
No, 100%. And I thought it was interesting where you said, I remember like always, you had talked about in your definition this unintentional consequences that we face. Yeah. And I always would feel so guilty or, always be like, well, how could people let this happen? Like, how could, they should have known earlier, like, how could they let this happen? But I sit back and think, well, a lot of times as humans, we're very much innovated from like the very first, human to whatever generation in time, it's how can we be better? And so a lot of these innovations have impacted the environment obviously in a negative way, but have made our way of living arguably better and easier and more convenient. So it's like you can't. It's hard to, like you had said, these unintentional. Like it's almost hard to blame someone if they're trying to make the world a more convenient or quicker or faster or better. So that's something that I found like in your answers super interesting.
Oh crap! Sorry.
Little interruption of the phone.
Yeah, it's fine. I'm not more hypocrisy from your instructors. Anyway, that's always nice. Okay, fine.
At first, I was curious if someone was like calling into the show. Like I was like, wait, like did somebody find this interesting?
That would
like,
be great.
Which we do have that option, and I do need to figure that out. But so, my next kind of question going into that is like, at what point? Because for me, it really came this year as I took capstone and started learning about, especially waste, for example, like what my impact on the world is with my own individual waste. At what point for you were you like, oh, this is a problem, or I need to change my habits in order to help at an individual level fix this problem?
Oh yeah. Well, you mean in my life, largely big picture?
Yeah, was there like a period of time, maybe as you were in college or wherever that was, where, hey, I need to practice some sort of sustainability?
Sure. I mean, for me, it was kind of second nature in my biography. I mean, later on, it sort of grew and developed. But from my earliest memories, I sort of had in my consciousness in ways that are weird, in particular, awareness that what we're doing is sort of problematic. And the short version of that is my father was a chemical engineer, and he was exposed to a lot of vinyl chlorides, which are sort of the basic building material of plastics, PVCs and stuff. And so he had this really rare cardioangiosarcoma thing that killed him when I was 4 years old. And I have no recollection of any of this, but it was never like my mother ever hid, like, or, we asked basic questions of why did Dad get sick and die? And, and the answer was, well, because he was exposed to bad chemicals at work.
Yeah.
And when you're that's one of your like earliest memories, not necessarily the earliest or whatever. For me, it just sort of set up this condition of like, like it's not surprising that the world is sort of like kind of messed up environmentally, because it's just sort of foundational in my own social, my own family that was just sort of there. And so going through life, I mean, I think that for me, it was just kind of obvious in ways because of that.
So did your family, did you guys practice, these maybe habits, or was that kind of just from you? You made your own conscious decision?
Well, I think that we did not in the way I practice stuff. My mother sort of went on and just sort of lived a sort of fairly typical sort of middle class lifestyle. And in fact, to these days, when we have adult level conflicts, it's often about their environmental practices still. They're more appropriate and grown up than perhaps they were. So no, they didn't really do it so much.
And so obviously you talk about this turning point, what was it what were some of the things in the beginning when you decided maybe you're living on your own and you were able to make your own decisions? What were the things that you began to do, and how to this day are you continuing those practices?
Sure. Well, when I was maybe more like college age, it was the late 80s, early 90s. And so it was, the main focus was sort of on recycling, and that wasn't sort of as universally available, though it's not universally available. So I worked in restaurants to get through college, and I started recycling programs at all of them. So primarily like wine bottles and stuff, and I just had this old Honda Accord, and I would take them. There'd be a city thing, but this sort of like pick up at the curb didn't happen yet, at least in where I was living. And so I would fill that up, and it would stink up my car pretty bad. I always joked, like, if I ever got pulled over, they're definitely going to have me do a blow test, because I'm like, it's the recycling. So I did that. And then there was sort of, I don't know, it's sort of grown over the years, I think because, for me, I felt a lot of guilt about sort of how I lived, but not always clear how to sort of do much about it. So And for me, like the guilty, that my worst there's probably a couple areas in which I'm far from perfect in this, but like the car is a big one, right? And for large chunks of my life, the car was just sort of in transportation was close to an economic necessity. It could have been avoided, but only at like great expenditure of time, primarily, like taking public transit. So that was one. But over the years, it's grown. I don't want to go in too long, so I don't. But yeah, that was sort of the initial thing. It was just sort of, for me, it was like, this is sort of overwhelming as an individual, much less as a thing. Like, let me choose one thing I can sort of do, and that always provided a certain amount of satisfaction. Like, okay, I can't do everything or whatever, but I can do this.
For sure. And one thing I know, especially about professors here, and something that I try to do, like, if I'm walking to, like, the whisk, the Twisted Whisk, or if I'm wanting to go, like, I'm not going to hop in my car, because I feel like that's unnecessary to start up my car. I just want to enjoy the outside, but even learning about just, like, oh, man, do I really just need to start my car? And I've noticed how professors, a lot of them ride their bikes, and I know you ride your bike to work. Obviously, many people live close, but something the other week, actually, as I was going home for like the first time all year, and as I left Bluffton and hopped on 70, or I was going down towards home, I noticed started thinking, like, I can't, like, if I, especially back home, I couldn't ride my bike to work. I couldn't achieve like this goal of like, this kind of this car goal by eliminating, as much as I can. And so I started to think like, oh no, like that's a problem, because it's like, you would want to be, I would enjoy riding my bike to work. I'm sure all of you guys enjoy riding your bike to work, and you feel like, okay, this is just some small individual thing that I can do to help impact the environment in a positive way. But I started to realize like that's not practical for everybody.
Yeah, and that's, on the one hand, it's practicality of just pure distance, right? On the other hand, it's also interesting, and that's one way, like, why cities are actually somewhat surprisingly greener, because you can actually do that more easily. There's and as well as public transportation. But it's also, we sort of just built this world where, especially if you live in the suburbs or something like that, it's not necessarily, it's built for cars, right? And even from the safety perspective, as well as, we just have literally built this physical world that's not necessarily conducive to that. And so, the challenge in some of these things is we have to rebuild some of this stuff. So having lived in Portland, they've been over time, bicyclists are really activist in terms of creating more bike lanes and sort of carving out space for that. And so, yeah, it's a heck of a challenge depending on where you live.
No, for sure. And I mean, again too, like with like the suburban kind of, one thing I've noticed, like I've been to Israel, and I know in other Middle East countries they build on top of each other. Oftentimes their families will be level on top of level on top of level. And very much everything is decently close. Obviously, you'll have to drive places, but everything could be in walking distance for a lot of people.
Right.
But something about here is, I mean, we're a very obviously big country, and this suburban kind of thing you're talking about is like, we want as much space in between us as possible. Now, some of these newer neighborhoods, it's they're very close together, but I've noticed it's like, you want space in between everything. And I don't know if that's so much I don't know what the reason behind that is, but it definitely causes you to hop in your car and, drive down the road to the gas station or to the supermarket or whatever the case may be.
Yeah, no, for sure. And it may well be like a cultural artifact of our history. We sort of once, where we expanded so much, and as well as just sort of like it's a marker of success to some degree for many folks. Like, I got my lawn, I got my space, but now I need to do this.
Yeah, and I don't know which class I was talking about this in, but like this, we've taken away this like community aspect of living with each other. It used to be a community would raise a child, like a village would raise a child. That's what people always would say, like, oh, it takes a village to raise a child. But now we've like put up these boundaries in between each of our houses, and it's like, I don't really want the community to help build to raise a child. So there is this like, I don't know if it's selfish, but just definitely thinking so much about ourselves first, which that can be selfish. I guess that would be selfish, but maybe unintentionally selfish.
Yeah.
It's just the way the culture is nowadays.
Yeah, I think so. Some of that's changed, and it may seem like natural or just inevitable, but I think you're right. I think a lot of that has changed both with respect to the larger community or even our understanding of sort of family life, right? I would imagine as you go globally, a lot of people like really stick with their elders,
for
example,
sure.
right? Yeah.
So what else have you? Because I did a little research before.
Yeah.
Shout out to Lou Westcott because she did a great interview with you the other week, and I read some of your habits that you participate in. So, could you run us through kind of what goes in your house? Like what happens?
Well, one of the wacky things that I've long thought about, and I wish I've long thought about just the amount of stuff I throw out, and we all throw out, right? It's kind of, if you think of it, it's kind of staggering. Because you use it, so many disposable items, you use them once, sort of definitionally, and then they go in the trash, and you never think about them. But then they're sort of deposited in the earth somewhere, and they stick around for a long time. And plastic is, probably the most obvious and obnoxious of these sorts of things. So, in recent years, I've mainly just lived with that as like, that's a weird thing I think about, and I try to reduce my consumption of those things. But now, in recent years, I realized like, I could actually probably really try to reduce it even more and try to compost this sort of stuff that I might otherwise get landfilled and then rot. And because when it rots in a landfill, typically that's without oxygen, and so it'll produce methane in relatively small amounts. There's much bigger sources of methane, but methane is sort of like a highly, highly not influential, but highly impactful greenhouse gas or whatever. So you want to do all that. So in short, I have what I call a wet compost system and a dry garbage system. And I don't need too much meat. I actually can you're not supposed to put meat and cheese and dairy in compost, but if you do it in small enough quantities, it's not really a problem. The only reason you do that is because it could attract vermin, right? So in your compost pile or whatever, and you got to be careful about that because once the vermin comes, nobody's happy.
Well, isn't there a vermin composting? Can't you do?
Oh, that's worm composting, is it's not vermin, but it's vermi composting. But that's different than vermin. Vermin, I mean like rats.
Oh, okay, got you.
And mice and stuff, which however cute they might be, they're really kind of filthy, and you don't want them anywhere near your house. So I just compost anything that's wet, and that I don't use a lot of paper towels or something, but actually, like weirdly, like I try to spread it throughout my day. So when I wash my hands on campus, I dry them with a paper towel. Some people, I don't. It's always hard to like, what do you do with a paper towel? Sometimes I don't, and then I hold on to them in my pocket, and I take them home, and they make in the compost pile. And I get a lot of pleasure out of that because I'm effectively growing dirt out of all these things that otherwise would be landfilled. So that's one thing I do that's a little bit on the odd side.
I mean, but if you think about it, I mean, people used to, you always saw, like grandpa or someone else with the handkerchief. And
yeah.
I think it's something that
it's probably less germy than that, almost certainly.
Yes. I mean, I think people have gone away from that partly because of we kind of live in this like weird, like I need to be clean, but it's not always, germs aren't the worst thing in the world. And especially if you're washing your hands, like you were saying over and over again, it's really just you washing your hands.
Right. No, yeah, for sure. They should be pretty clean. The issue for me is that, but yeah, no, absolutely. Culturally, we've gotten really afraid of dirt, which is part of the estrangement from nature, I would argue, right? It's actually probably one of the best reasons why allergies have shot up, because actually we've been, not testing out our immune systems with enough dirt. Okay, quite seriously, there's research on this comparing like Amish folks kids who grow up with concrete floors in their barns and dirt floors in their barns, and the ones who grow up with dirt floors in their barns where like the Amish kids go and hang out and work and play and stuff, and they have fewer allergies. So it's sort of interesting in some of the health studies. The other thing is like, do we have a very we've gone to a very disposable society, right? So that like all these marvels of innovation and technology we just randomly throw away, Like, I have a weird attitude about plastic bags and Ziplocs in particular. Like, I refuse to buy a plastic bag because my life is overflowing with plastic bags of people giving them to me, right? Does that make sense? I just constantly have to say no. And it's even when I occasionally do say yes, I'm not overboard about it. And then if I get if I don't know, I feel like it's it's a weird like spiritual practice of gratitude too. But this is going to sound a little weird. But like when I say visit my parents, and my parents, God bless them or whatever, they like go through Ziploc bags like crazy. Yeah. And then occasionally they got a clean Ziploc bag. They've had a cold piece of pizza overnight, and I say, "Can I have this?" And I feel like it's Christmas in whatever month it is because I have this amazing invention, and I got it for free. And I'm not just going to go landfill it after using once. So anyway, I get really excited about that, and it's kind of dorky and weird, but it's also kind of like I feel like we sort of, in the disposable thing, like we sort of like have all these, we're surrounded by this amazing stuff, but we literally treat it like trash. And it's kind of weird.
100%. I mean, I think too, like, a couple examples for me is I used to, and when I go home, I work for like a cleaning company. And oftentimes we'll, if we're like cleaning offices or something, we'll dump the trash. And it's always like, oh, just dump the trash out into like a bigger trash can. Don't take out the individual bag. Like, why would I take, it's just napkins and paper towel. Like, why would I need to, and maybe a little bit of gum,
if there's like stinky food waste, maybe.
But if it's, if it's nothing crazy. And also too, I've noticed the inconvenience of cleaning out and refilling like coffee for my Keurig. I find it so frustrating in the morning. Like, I have to clean out the coffee and then and so the little K cups are so convenient just to pop in there. But how much waste like that is each day, especially if I'm drinking multiple cups a day. That's just a bunch of when I could, or just even buy like a coffee pot or like a French roast. So there's so many other options instead of just popping in and you even talk about price too. One of those things that maybe come with like 15 K cups cost $8 when I could buy the thing of like the Maxwell House, for.
Well, you could buy better coffee and probably per cup still save money on that. They sell reusable K cup things, right? Do you know about that?
That's what I mean. That's what I'm talking about. Like,
you're using the reusable one.
I have one at home, and I would also oftentimes like switch between like the K cups and the coffee grounds depending on what I had in my. But like I would find it so frustrating, like my grumpy self in the morning, like picking out the coffee and then having to refill it, whereas it would take me maybe 5 less seconds to put in a K cup.
Right. And that's an interesting thing in and of itself in terms of like how easily we're like psychologically influenced by convenience, right? And sort of like this, for lack of a better word, like instant gratification, right? Like 5 seconds of work. And I don't know, that's a complicated thing, but it's actually really changed a lot in recent human history, right? And so we should just be mindful of that. You know what I mean? And
definitely.
Sometimes it's just real, but sometimes you got to talk to yourself and say, wait a minute, it's not that bad.
100%. So, hey, we're here again with Chris Morrissey, Sarah Woods, talking about our environmental impact, sustainability. Hope you guys are enjoying the conversation. You're listening to 96.1 The Wits. So, Chris, I have another question. I'm going to piggyback again off of Lou. And I know you had talked to our class about this, but what is up with the ditch behind Sommer Center?
The ditch is the place to be, man.
That's the spot to be?
No, well, no one seems to know that or do it, but I'm there. In short, when I first got here, I rented 401 West Elm Street, the house, big bungalow, one of the COVID houses, pre-COVID house days, before that glorious turn of events. And I was there for the first glorious COVID summer, and I spent a lot of time after building several structures in the backyard, including the grape arbor that's back there. But anyway, they've sold the house since. And I sat under my not really yet happening grape arbor, and I stared out at that lovely field behind the Summer Center, and I said, that's a beautiful vista. Actually, pretty nice. You know what I mean? If you get a little hill after living in the West, you enjoy the hill, right? You know what I'm saying? Out in these parts, and then I started saying, I mean, to be totally honest, my ambition was like, why are we mowing that lovely field? Anyway, that was my first thought. But then I was like, well, that's probably going to be a hard sell because everyone likes campus to look like a golf course or whatever. Fair enough. So I said, well, they're not mowing the ditch. Maybe we could start with the ditch. And so I don't really know my native stuff well, but the general idea is like we've sort of messed with the natural environment a lot, particularly around milkweeds. And milkweed is really important as this one of the principal host for monarch butterfly reproductions. Which, you know, who doesn't like a monarch butterfly? Even I like a monarch butterfly. I mean, so I just sort of approached the sustainability club last year and said, hey, you want to see if we can take over this ditch that everyone's neglecting? So that started a long bureaucratic process that eventually gave us permission to do that. And so since the Sustainability Club and me, a lot of me just hanging over the summer, have been sort of working to sort of transition it. But it's a big ditch, so it's kind of a slow work in progress.
I know someone who was last year in one of the COVID houses.
Oh, yeah.
They said that they were looking outside. They're just like, you know, chilling, whatever, and looking outside. And they're like, yeah, dude, like I saw Chris Morrissey just like over by the ditch, just like chilling. Like, because I'd explained, like, oh, yeah, like I know, you know, yeah. Chris Morrissey, he wants to do this thing with the ditch and plants. And they're like, yeah, dude, like we saw him like chilling over there one time.
It's beautiful over there. It really is. I mean, everyone should consider hanging out by the ditch. I had permission to go to Buildings and Grounds sort of scrapyard behind the FAR building and Buildings and Grounds, and there's a nice bench there. There's sort of like a jewel encrusted, not worth any money, like toy jewels encrusted bowling ball, which I'm trying to get a proper stand for, but I haven't really. So we got some like a little bit of ornamentation going on. It doesn't have to all be natural, but yeah, it's a nice place to hang out actually.
So what all have you planted there?
Well. We got a bunch of seeds initially, the Sustainability Club, and we had a work day maybe about a little less than a year ago, right about now, late fall. And we got seeds from the community garden. We got a bunch of perennials, in short, mainly really focusing, of course, on milkweeds. But then when you want monarchs to come, you want some other sources of food. And so we had a whole bunch of variety of them. Honestly, I'm really bad on native plants. Most of them didn't grow. So then that's what happened in the spring. Became a further work of actually just trying to transplant some plants because basically, I am a gardener with enough skill to like try to keep things reasonably moist and hope for the best, but it wasn't enough. And so I started transplanting. I found some local sources for milkweed. Milkweed's actually supposed to be really hard to transplant, but I think I figured out how to sort of make that happen. You just got to water the heck out of it. As my short answer. And then some what's called Mexican sunflowers, which actually aren't perennials, but I just had a donation of them. And then a fair amount of echinacea, purple cone flowers in particular. Those are some of the big ones. And then I just went around and got some other perennials, mostly natives, but not entirely. The thing is like 125 feet long.
Yeah.
Which and I don't know how many feet wide, but there's a lot of empty space.
So is it starting to look better? Like, does it look like?
It does not look like a golf course, but it sort of depends on your standards. I mean, what I find attractive. I think I would encourage people to go out there and start proposing for marriage at the ditch. There's a new Bluffton tradition we can all get behind, but it's quite lovely in an understated sort of natural way. There's generally it's rain runoff from the parking lot and from Summer Center, so there's a fair amount of life down there depending on how dry it is. Birds come and feed. There's a ton of insects and stuff. I did not personally spot any monarchs or caterpillars, though. But I think it's quite lovely. But it's kind of a subtle way, in ways that, again, part of this alienation. I think large numbers of people have sort of come to appreciate nature in a very unnatural way.
For sure.
It's not like a well-cultivated garden, for example.
So what has been, like, what have you enjoyed most about, like, this process of that?
Having moved when the house became the COVID house, I had to move out, and I moved to a place that really didn't have any gardening opportunities. So frankly, just on a personal level, I like to garden. I actually accidentally started growing vegetables in the ditch last year because Buildings and Grounds asked me to move my raised bed garden behind the old house, and I moved it over, and like these tomato plants sprung up, and so that was lovely. And I got a pumpkin out of it too. So that was crazy. So I'm going to probably do surreptitiously broadcasting on this, but. And then just a feeling like I was kind of, I mean, on the one hand, I have mixed feelings about it. Sometimes I kind of feel like a fool, like the old man in the sea. I'm like the old man in the ditch, right? You know what I mean? Like, is this worthwhile? Is this going to pay off?
For sure.
Do I look like a fool if someone happened to notice me? And I'm happy that someone even noticed me because honestly, most of the time, I don't really see too many folks. But on the other hand, it seems like, well, I don't know. And part of this is sort of like, spirituality stuff, actually, and Quakers talk about this stuff all the time, sort of lots of Christians and other folks, but you feel led to do something, and sometimes it doesn't make a whole lot of sense, but especially this is like low cost stuff. I mean, I wasn't like, it was like gardening in the evening for me or something like that with so that's it. And it kind of felt like, okay, I'll just do this. I don't know exactly what this, build it and the monarchs will come sort of thing.
Yeah, no, definitely. I think that's interesting. And I know when you started talking about it, I was like when you showed our class it, I was kind of like a ditch. Like I was very much confused and and then when you showed us, I was like, okay, like I can see kind of like where he's going with this or like what the idea or like what the vision is about this. Yeah. But I had no knowledge, pre-existing knowledge of it.
Well, and it's interesting. It really connects into this history of sort of doing stuff that's not really that great. So a long time in Ohio, in many other places, we thought milkweed was exactly that, a weed, but it's really necessary for monarchs to reproduce, in particular, both here and particularly out west. And a year ago, the monarchs just didn't get listed as an endangered species. And people were really quite worried about that. Some of the year they count these things, I don't know exactly all the methods, but this looks like a slightly better year. But they're not doing well because we've just spent I don't know exactly, maybe 100 years or so getting rid of the milkweed. And so actually the ditches have been one place where they've survived in Ohio and the Midwest or whatever. So yeah, there's sort of like this interesting history that that's kind of fun to think about and just like, oh, I don't know that we need to restore everything, but we created this ditch in this, environmentally, responsible building. It just seemed like a cool thing. So anyway, cool.
Definitely. And I know with, I remember, so I worked for a lawn care company around here actually. Yeah. And great people, great company. I mean, nothing but but I remember one time we were, spraying for, like a lot of times we'd spray ditches. Because they would get too big. You know what I mean? We'd spray the ditches, the county would ask us to. Right. And so we'd spray these ditches and, didn't think much of it. And I remember one time, farmers would come out and they'd be extremely upset because it could kill their plants or soybeans or corn or whatever the case may be. Yeah. But I remember this one guy came out in particular and, he was, super angry and he was like, dude, this is a bee sanctuary or what, this is save the bees type vibe. And right. I remember being like, wait, that is odd that we're just going around literally spraying this thing that could kill these just kill this these weeds or whatever in a ditch off the road that probably no one's really second guessing what it looks like.
Right. Or even if they are, why does it matter?
It's a ditch. Right. It's not right. But then that goes to that kind of, and this will even transition to our next, topic about being aesthetically pleasing. Sure. And so speaking of that, being aesthetically pleasing, this is why Sarah Woods is also on the show as well, because we're going to be talking about the Solar Birch Project, which Chris or Sarah, if you guys, what is the Solar Birch Project?
I've been talking too much, Sarah. You need to get close.
Some cords over there.
So I don't remember all the details about the case, but basically there's a project that's happening around my neighborhood in Lima, Ohio, in Shawnee Township. And there's a large solar company that wants to partner with BP to put in solar panels in, don't remember how many acres of farmland. But basically they want to buy this land from the farmers and put in these fields to help create sustainable, clean energy. And many people around the neighborhood are very against it because it's right across from their house, it's near their property, they'd have to look at it, and then they have some other complaints about soil contamination and harmful effects to the environment.
So, Sarah Woods, why are you relevant to this conversation? Well, you're relevant to every conversation, but why specifically this conversation?
Well, I think because it's happening in my neighborhood, and I initially heard about it because Chris had emailed me one weekend, I think, and I gave him a call, and he told me about an upcoming project and about a meeting that was taking place for a public hearing for these solar panels. And he asked if I would like to come speak at the meeting and share my opinion, either in support or against it, because those testimonies that people are giving will be relevant when making the decision whether to implement the solar farm.
And so, Chris, you had taken our class, Social Justice, Social Change. You had taken our class to this public hearing that we had, which it was one of my best college experiences I had. Like, I felt like I was actually, like, seeing what we've learned about before in the past, whether that's in the class or just, like, I felt like I was in a movie almost. Like, it felt, like, very, like, oh, this is real life. Like, these are things that happen. So why did you decide to take us on that, like, that field trip?
Well, this was very much an evolving situation. The solar field issue. We were it fit just remarkably well into the class, but it took me a while of thinking about it. So I did ask Sarah, and I was open-ended. I was certainly hoping she'd speak in favor of the project, but whatever. I tried to express that it was okay either way. And I didn't realize she lived there at the time. I was just sort of like, I was being recruited by activists in support of it to say, do you have anybody on campus that you think might speak to this? And I lucked out in that she was geographically relevant, right? And then, I mean, she's always relevant, of course, as you suggest. But, and then it just became aware as I was thinking about it that I was like, well, this fits perfectly into our class. So that's why we expanded it to that. And it was just like the timing was near perfect. I mean, it sort of expanded that unit in the middle, but I think it worked well, and I'm happy to hear that it was a good experience for you.
No, definitely. And so why is this a conflict in Lima? Like, what is, like, the big issue with the solar panels? Because I remember thinking, like, no way this is a problem for people. Because I called Sarah this summer as I was driving up to her house.
Yeah.
I called Sarah and I was like, dude, why are all these, like, people saying, like, they're against solar energy? Like, what could be so bad about solar energy? And she was just kind of like, people just, like, up here, like don't like the aesthetic of it and don't think it looks good. And as I went to this meeting, I was like, kind of, and I was hearing their perspectives. I was like, what's the conflict behind it? What's the problem? Like, why do you guys think there's a problem with solar energy in Lima?
Well, I think the location that it's being put in, I don't think people as much have a problem with the kind of energy it creates, but it's more about the whole not in my backyard thing. It's more the fact that they have to look at it. But there are many issues, many instances of this around the world where people just don't believe in cleaner energy. They don't believe in climate change and the need for sustainability. So it's tough to say the exact arguments that they have, but it seems mostly to be I don't know, mostly about the aesthetic and mostly about the way it looks.
Yeah, because it took a while during the meeting to begin to hear about people having an issue with the climate. Like, they were like, hey, this is, forget all this stuff. Like, we're talking about, we're in kind of a desperate need for, like, these climate changes and these sustainability changes to happen. And so I found that interesting. Like, it didn't seem like people were, so it was like an aesthetic thing. You know what I mean? And so I'm curious, too, what do you guys, obviously you guys both live around here. I'm from back home, which I obviously live here for school. What do you guys think the odds are of this happening?
You go first.
Based on how the meeting went, it seemed that most people were opposed to the project. There were a number of people who spoke in support of it, but I feel that if they're really taking the community's opinions, like, into account, then I think there's a pretty good chance it will not get passed, but I wouldn't be surprised either way.
Yeah, I think I largely agree with Sarah. If they, to the degree that they take the community feedback seriously, I think that it's probably going to be no. But it's hard to say. It's, the new rules that really explicitly put community feedback into process aren't relevant to this, even though they're now state law. So a lot of it depends on how the bureaucrats go. But I wouldn't be surprised if that's the outcome.
Yeah, but it also makes me hopeful that the Ohio Electric Siting Board has also passed many other projects like this in the past. So that makes me hopeful that maybe they will give it a good consideration.
No, definitely. And I thought one thing that was super interesting was a guy had mentioned, hey, this is this person's property. You know, like we had talked about earlier, we're so concerned about our individual needs. But in this case, it was like all of a sudden this was like you're messing with the community. And it's like, when have we ever been concerned about the community? Like this guy was saying, dude, it's his farm, it's his land. Like, should he not, be able to do what he pleases with his land? Especially if he believes that it could be some sort of, passive income for the next generation, and maybe his family could have some sort of income. And like, I just felt like it was just a very odd kind of excuse. But I very much was humbled during that meeting too, because I found myself saying, hey, like, they also have a very valid opinion on a couple things, and like their opinions aren't as bad as what I thought they would be. So I found it to be a very interesting and educational meeting, to say the least. So that's obviously something that's a local issue here around Lima. And after that, I found myself, because I'm taking Capstone, which Capstone is this course on obviously being economically friendly and sustainability. And I found myself saying, well, what does Bluffton do for the environment? Like, what are we doing around here? Obviously, we have the Sustainability Club, which I do know the past president, shout out Jenny Dorsey. And she was very much, every time we were in conversation, she was talking to me about some sort of plan they were doing. And so she definitely had a passion and heart. And I do know they're continuing to do events like making your own laundry detergent, and focusing on, and they give out oftentimes like reusable straws or cups. But I was curious though, because in our Capstone book, we have this section where it gives us a sustainability agreement, something that we had talked about in my BAS class, only in my BAS class. I haven't heard about it since, and I honestly don't even remember reading it then. And something that I found interesting, which, I mean, Sarah and Chris, you guys are both relevant to Bluffton. It was, one of the quotes was, volunteering time, money, and patience in serving the community, serving the community with this project. And I kind of sat back, and I see a lot of patience, patience. If patience means, a long time of, waiting for something, I do see patience, but I'm not sure where the time and money is coming from. And I'm curious, what is Bluffton doing right now, maybe that you two know of, to participate in sustainability? And maybe, like, what could we do better? Or what are ideas that we could do?
So I'm not aware of too many things that we do as a campus. I do know about the recycling bins that we have throughout most buildings on campus, like in the residence halls and Marbeck. So in terms of that, I think that's good, but I think we could improve our recycling some, and recycling more waste than just cans and bottles and paper.
I find this to be an interesting mystery. I find that there are some good things going on campus in this respect, but I think that it's our response, I would describe somewhat diplomatically, as underwhelming, for lack of a better word. And so my question, not to be a lame teacher here and turn it back onto you, is like, what could we be doing? I think cost is always a very real and fair question to bring up. But I think that a lot of other, you don't always, you got to be careful with comparison, but a lot of other colleges and universities have done some stuff. And I have, just really like to see us do more, basically. I'm not entirely sure what that looks like. I mean, I have some ideas of what that might look like, but, waste is one thing in terms of, the perennial, you guys were talking, I know from talking with you, like, you were talking about like food waste which there have been innovations before, probably just, the tray issue, that's why we don't have trays, because
Right.
a lot of institutions did that as a way to make it harder to carry food, hopefully reduce the waste. But I'm a huge fan of composting, as is probably clear by now. There are some challenges with that. Probably none of these things like compost can you do at no cost or whatever, but you can certainly do low cost stuff. But also, I'm pretty motivated. Ohio, it's clear cut largely in our history in Ohio, and so we basically still cut at the nature preserve, which I find kind of confounding. So I'd like to see that change. It just seems we have it's not going to be a huge impact, but my standard is always something is better than nothing. And we need carbon sinks at this point, and forests generally do serve that purpose with some variability in their life cycle about how much they are sinks rather than releasers of carbon. Yeah.
For sure. I'm going to put my 2 cents in here because I think Sarah knows I've had my thoughts about this, because I do find it kind of challenging to, as a senior level course, to have capstone where you come up with this grand plan, but very much you leave the next year. And you talked about the difficulty of your ditch, of how long is this going to take, right? And so am I expected as a senior to make up this plan and then leave it? And how could it even seem to come into fruition? We talked about in our CTF project was a simple thing like composting, where it could be not simple, but it's very much practical, and it's something that, like you had said, it could be low cost. But I do also find it troubling. One thing I saw here was spending money and time, and I do know there was a large amount of money that is to send students to the Great Adventure. And I think it's a great part of the curriculum, but to me it just seems like a one-time experience thing. And if we look at our core values of community, respect, and service, and discovery, I feel like sustainability goes in with those core values. And it definitely would reflect what our campus, and I'd say most professors do believe, and teach us at Bluffton. And so I would be eager and curious if there's something that we could implement as a campus, to a practical thing that students can be involved in, while also an educational thing where students understand, okay, this is Ohio Northern, for example, they have the wind turbines and solar energy there. That's very much that gives them energy, but it also teaches students okay, this is how this works. But I'm not sure that Bluffton has really much to where students see a large impact from some sort of practical habits. I do know I believe Bluffton is actually does decently well with waste and the cafeteria. They have certain programs that kind of look at their waste and how much they should buy and how much they should use. And so I do think they're very much conscious of that. But I would like to see a project happen, something that Bluffton can say, hey, this is what we do and we're proud of doing this, some sort of sustainability thing. So that's my 2 cents. And then I was going to ask you, Chris, one more question, and even Sarah as well, if you'd like to chime in. What could students do better on campus to practice sustainability and have a positive environmental impact? Or what are ways that, even another question, what are ways that we could help? Maybe not even do better, but what are ways that we could help make Bluffton a more sustainable place?
You ready to go? No. I need a moment if you're ready. If not, I'll start.
Yeah. I think it's kind of challenging because the fact that we aren't doing too much as a campus as a whole, it really limits what we are able to do as students individually. I reuse my water bottles, I carry on undisposable things, I thrift my clothes, but to not be able to have a project like you were talking about on campus, I feel like I'm not having a major impact in improving the environment. And I think it'd be cool to implement a project like that, or maybe create a community garden on campus, or having donation drives at the end of every school year where students can donate this stuff while they're moving out. Little things like that where we just immediately throw stuff away and just dispose of everything.
Yeah, it's a great question, and part of the reason it stumped me a little bit. If I had to say one thing, I'd maybe not focused on sort of what programs specifically, because I really think there are any variety of relatively low cost. There's work involved in these. What I would like to see, and it's still a mystery to me, I really have a hard time, and I'm not sure what the answer is, believing that students don't care about this. I mean, some students clearly don't care about this, right? Fair enough. In any group of people, some people don't care. But I think that there's a care about there. But I would like to see somehow, I feel like it's just people feel so overwhelmed with it or whatever, either coming out of COVID, or it just seems like so hard. I would like to see like that care overcome that apathy, and it's not apathy, it's just sort of like overwhelmness with like some degree of positive action. And I just feel like there's got to be, and I'm not always every day a believer in this, because some days I wonder, because I've been pushing it a little bit in my courses, hopefully when appropriate. I don't want to just be pushing, but asking questions about it. I would just sort of like to see an attitudinal, like motivational change about it, to where people can say, hey, we could do something about this. Hey, rather than feeling overwhelmed and just awful about this, let's do something today or this year. And that would be the start of something really good. And of course, that's happening in small pockets, but I think that it needs to happen a little bit in broader pockets and across different pockets and stuff like that.
For sure, 100%. And I think even adding on to that, I think you talked about like being overwhelmed, A, with COVID, and B, with like I try my best to unplug from social media. I usually don't have many apps on my phone for social media. Just because I remember during COVID, it was like constant overflow of knowledge. And I think even with this climate change, it's the same thing. It's like constant. And so there's that like fear aspect. And sometimes you can only take so much. So there is it is overwhelming. But I think also too, we're overwhelmed with our studies.
Yeah.
And that's why I would want to put, I'd want some backing on like the university to be able to say, okay, like here's maybe some resources you guys can use, and maybe here's some help from either a faculty member or somebody. Let's push this in the right direction, because it is tough to build something from the ground as a student. I mean, you're dealing with however much course load you have, and it's tough. And you talked about like with your garden and your ditch, like it takes time and it takes effort. And sometimes if I have $25 in my bank account, if you're a broke college student, like that's tough. You don't that's tough to start something. And so, you hear about those stories of these students doing miraculous things, but it's just a small percentage of students, and oftentimes they do have resources from the university to do these things. So I would that'd be something I wish that, and it is also a reflection on ourselves too. Like I definitely find myself wasting way too much. So it's like, how can I be better? And hopefully if somebody sees me doing a certain habit or doing a certain practical, sustainable thing, they would be able to say, hey, what are you doing? Why are you doing this? And maybe offer them some sort of feedback on that.
No, absolutely. I feel like I often say in conversations on this topic with people that I do not want to put this entirely on the backs of students. It just seems inappropriate. So yeah, I really think that doing something like this is going to require collaboration across lots of different groups of folks.
Definitely, 100%. So today you have listened to Chris Morrissey, myself, and Sarah Woods talk about sustainability and our environmental impact. And we are concluding the show today. And so I hope you guys enjoyed what we had to say. And I hope you enjoy the music that's coming up. And you're listening to 96.1 The Wit. Thank you for listening.